everyone, welcome to another video. I am very sorry for the unfortunate delay. I have been fairly busy for these past 3 months, and I've been fairly tired as a result. And whenever I wanted to make a video, I just couldn't put the energy into making it to the point where I could fully express what I would want to talk about. But now, luckily, I have now found some time and energy to get caught up with everything. So you will be getting 3 videos for the month of August, and that should technically cover June, July, and August's video. So without further ado, for this particular video, I wanted to briefly touch upon a film that I think is a little bit overlooked, and I think a lot of the criticism that it gets is kind of not necessarily, I think, that legitimate. And I still think when I look back upon this particular famous actor's career, this film, for some reason, I think stands out to me more so than a lot of his other material does. And as you could probably see by the title and the thumbnail, this video is intended to discuss the pursuit of happiness. And happiness in this film is actually not spelt correctly, but I think that is intentional because it's actually based upon a book, and within the book there's sort of a reference to that saying and the word happiness being spelt differently. So there's sort of a little bit of context in there as far as why it's not spelled in the same way that we would imagine the way it should be spelled. It's kind of bizarre, and it kind of threw me off at first when I saw the title, because I went, wait a minute, this is totally not how happiness is spelled. But again, there is sort of a reasoning behind it. So not only is this movie kind of based off of a book, but sort of somebody's life. In particular, the life of, and I don't want to butcher this person's name, Chris Gardner. Yes, he was the person sort of behind his sort of, I guess you could say, memoir book. And he was someone who was sort of on the verge of poverty with his son. And eventually he got out of poverty and became fairly successful as I believe it's a stockbroker, if I'm not mistaken, is where primarily his success eventually derived from. But largely the film in particular focuses on the poverty level and struggle more so than on the success that Chris ends up obtaining at the end. And Chris Gardner is played none other than Will Smith. And again, like I've said before, Will Smith is probably one of the more well-known actors if you were to kind of just go off of name recognition itself. And again, I think this film stands out as far as his other material because when you look at a lot of his other material, it's kind of fairly either cheesy or over the top. His more recent material, unfortunately, hasn't been all that successful for him or his son, unfortunately. And I believe his actual son is within this movie and plays his son. But as far as them being a duo together, I think this film actually portrays things in a fairly realistic and down-to-earth level, to the point where I genuinely feel a connection between the two characters, unlike a lot of his other more recent material. And again, I think where the criticism came from, at least from this film, from what I could tell, has largely to do with the fact that I think some critics think it's a little bit pretentious. Um, I think maybe some critics too might find the whole message of, yeah, if you just work yourself up from poverty, you know, you'll get out of poverty. And maybe that's something that doesn't resonate with a lot of people because, or some critics in particular, because it's not, I guess, sometimes a realistic message. Maybe that's kind of the angle, I think, as well, that they were kind of getting sort of critical of this film over. But I think that despite, you know, what messaging you can get out of the film, I still think that the messaging is overall positive, and the film does uplift you and makes you genuinely care about these people. In particular, the main character, Chris Gardner, who I think Will Smith does a fairly good job in portraying. Again, I think a lot of his earlier material, you really get to see his acting shine when he is able to be given a fairly serious role like this, as well as other films that he's been in, like, for example, I Am Legend. And yeah, we can talk about the issues with that film, but and the issues with this film, but I think largely and generally speaking, I think if he's given the right role and sort of the right material to work with, I think he can really bring something valuable to the table, and I think he really does sell this film fairly well by portraying this particular man and his struggles. Um, it sort of starts off with not necessarily them being in poverty, but they're sort of to the point of going into poverty. So you sort of see how he kind of has more of a little bit more of a normal life sort of in the beginning. And he has a wife and the child, and everything seems to be stable. And then you sort of see how it turns fairly quickly into being on the edge of poverty. And he sort of starts off as being a salesman of, I guess, these devices that some doctors use or have a use for. And that eventually, I guess, doesn't end up panning out well for him, because I guess he can't seem to sell these particular products, or at least the kind of product that he's trying to pitch to these doctors. And you sort of see how that ends up kind of splitting the family apart, unfortunately. The mom eventually sort of just decides to leave the family and basically kind of give up. And this kind of leaves Chris as being the single dad taking care of the child. And and you sort of see the pain and the real sadness that he has for sort of losing this kind of relatively stable sort of lifestyle, and how it just ends up just slipping away from him and just ends up causing just a massive shift in lifestyle, and how that ends up impacting him in very emotional and kind of depressing ways, and you see how he and his son sort of have to go from place to place because they don't have a place really to live anymore, because they end up going downhill to the point of being homeless, and sometimes having to go to hotel rooms to find a place to stay. And so you really see the hardship here. And I think this is what a lot of career movies and like success movies, they kind of don't really touch upon these things. They look at these like people who've been successful or are successful. They kind of show more of the glitz and glamour of it all. Like if you've seen films like Wall Street or Wolf of Wall Street, or just all these other types of films that kind of delve into corporate America, they kind of show you the sort of spoiled and snobbish kind of end of the spectrum of success. And they don't kind of show you sort of people who have been sort of on the edge and have been able to kind of get out of their circumstances. It's usually they just kind of they sort of have an idea and then they go off of it and then they become successful and rich. They don't really show you a level of hardship and a level of sacrifice that I think this movie really shows the audience. Which I think, again, is something that's really refreshing, and you don't really see that too often. So it's nice to see this angle approached here within this film, and to show people that not everyone that sort of became eventually successful or eventually ended up having a lot of money was, you know, or like they make the center more so about trying to make a living and lift yourself up rather than about the excess of wealth. And I think that's sort of a better approach to handling these kinds of films because, and again, it makes the characters feel a lot more human and a lot more relatable. So again, I think that's one of the things that makes this particular film stand out. Um, and again, even though it's more so character driven than really plot driven, uh, I would say because again, there's not really an end goal. The more so the end goal is just for him to become a stockbroker. And I guess he has to take all of these tests and things like that to, I think, pitch the products. As far as from what I can tell, I think that's what he has to end up sort of doing to ultimately get to that spot of what would be, I guess, stability for him. But at the end of the day, it's more so about his relationship with his son and him trying to create a better life for his son in the process. And eventually, at the end, he ends up becoming very, very wealthy, I suppose, from this. So, again, it's one of those stories that I think tries really hard to sort of not only embrace the sort of uh, struggles that come into play as far as the your outside world and surroundings are concerned, but I guess your relationships as well. You will see how Will Smith has a hard time kind of paying attention to his child because on the one hand he's trying to be the provider as well as the caretaker and caregiver. And again, you sort of see how the struggle of a single parent kind of to manage these two things by themselves as opposed to having somebody else there to kind of support and help that process. So again, I think that that level of interest and focus is again largely ignored in a lot of these kinds of movies where people are on sort of the edge of poverty, and a lot of the ones that I've seen that have been more so poverty involve like crime and things of that nature. And you will sort of see too how their atmosphere obviously is not the most welcoming or desirable one. But it's not really the focus. It's more so again, their relationship and their struggle to try to, you know, kind of build back the family up, so to speak, and in the process doing it together in a way that's that ends up being that ends up making sort of their relationship at the end of the day a lot more stronger. And again, this is not a film for everyone because, like I said, it is largely more so a character story and the characters struggle to ultimately get out of the circumstances that they're in, and it's not much so a particular it is, I guess you could say it is plot driven in the sense of just the goal of just getting out of poverty, but the way they get there, it's largely not trying to focus on the the plot more so of him trying to get out of poverty, and this is more so of his relationship with his son and how they work together and how they handle things to the point to where they can make it, so to speak, and climb out of the hole that they unfortunately ended up in. And I think this is a very relatable film in the sense that, you know, a lot of people have had their ups and downs, I think, financially speaking. And I think it's definitely hard because it's not really, you never really know when you're going to be stable or not, or when poof, everything is just going to disappear on you. And it is kind of scary, and it is sort of sad, and an unfortunate reality. Um, and it would be nice if eventually we could get to the point where people don't have to be in that huge, or have that huge anxiety put on them. But I think this film, regardless, still shows how no matter what, there is some hope for people. Um, and just as long as you just keep trying, that's really all that I think at the end of the day really matters. And I think that's sort of the overall message of the story at the end of the day, is not necessarily to become rich, but just to you know, just whatever life throws at you, just try to, you know, fight whatever it is that's thrown at you and just keep going. Uh, and I think, again, this is something that everybody can resonate with, even if they have not been in this kind of financial situation. But I think that's really all I can say about the film, generally speaking, without really giving too much away as far as to the nitty gritty context uh, that's involved with the characters and sort of the story. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And if there are any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to let me know. And until the next video, everybody.